Hey guys, welcome to the Charleston post-processing session. As you guys, many of you know, we attempted the live event and had some technical issues, and so we didn't. The recording froze up. We had some good conversation, but we didn't get too far into the post-processing. So we're going to make another attempt here. I've chosen an image from Charleston during the spring, the azaleas, the dogwoods, the same time that you guys were here. I chose one that's not going to need a whole lot of processing done to it, nothing really deep anyway. It is one that I haven't done yet. The first attempt for the live session, I had chosen one that I had already processed, and I was just going to go through the different layers to show you what I did to achieve the look with each step. But I think jumping into a raw image together, and one that's not going to be just super extensive, will be, I think it'll be better. It'll be easier to pick up on some of these tools that we use to get the images to where or how we want them to look once we're done. As you can see, I'm in Photoshop. We've got the TK Actions panel that's over here to our right up here. This is not going to be something I'm going to jump into with this image, just simply because it is a huge learning curve all on its own. We could spend a whole lot of time, I'm talking, a couple, 3 hours just on what all of this entails and how it works. And that can definitely be found in our community, Sharpen Your Shutter. This down here at the bottom, this is the Nick software package. This I absolutely think we'll be using in this image. It's another tool that we use quite a bit. And it's something I suggest that you guys, if you don't have, at least look into adding to your tool belt. A lot of good stuff in there. Really easy to use, a lot of good stuff. And you'll, as I mentioned, we'll probably implement it into this image, and you'll see how some of this stuff works. It's owned by DxO, and I think it's either $149 or $199. It's one of the two. It's a one-time deal. It's not a cloud thing. It's a one-time purchase, and then it's yours to keep. Let's go ahead and jump in. Going to come up to File, Open, and then I'm going to choose my image. Please ignore how randomly I have my library here. It's just it's god awful and it's embarrassing, but it is what it is. I believe it's this image right here. Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, when you go to open an image within Photoshop, the first thing that it's going to open into is, if you look up here at the top, it's called Camera Raw. Okay, so this is where most of your major adjustments are going to be made. This is very Lightroom-ish. So for those that use Lightroom only, you may recognize some of these tools over here being, very similar to what you find in Lightroom. It is set up differently, but the tools are somewhat the same. Very easy to use and very global. So the first thing that I typically am going to pay attention to is just simply the entire structure of the image. I'm not going to get into, you really can't get into any detailed work within RAW. That can be done in Photoshop, and that's how we start working with layers, and why it's so crucial to be able to work with layers is so you can create the detailed adjustments. And we'll get into that for sure. The first thing that I want to do is pay attention to my histogram up here. It's looking really good, okay? As you can see, for those that have heard me preach about pushing the histogram to the right, there's got a little bit of a gap over here to the far right, but not much. I pushed it pretty much as far as I could go before we start seeing some overexposure. So for those of you that haven't heard me talk about exposing to the right, that's something else that you can find within Sharpen Your Shutter. There's a whole, it's a good lengthy tutorial just on how important it is and how it can really increase everything, the entire dynamic range within your image. Super tool to use, and absolutely something we should be paying attention to with each and every shot. Excuse me. So this is, overall, especially for what this histogram is looking like, it's looking really good straight out of the camera. I had some good soft light, nothing that was no intense light that was pounding any area of this image, no hot spots on the road. It's just really even light. So I think the first thing that I'm going to do is just bump a little clarity over here. You can see this clarity slider. We got clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation in this section here. And clarity is something that I tend to use on each and every image just to, if you can see what happens if you really crank it up. It kind of starts looking a little too HDR-ish. But I use it just enough to give all the edges just a little bit of pop. So when it says clarity, I think you can probably think in the same ballpark of sharpness, but it's not sharpening. But it definitely works on the contrast, between your darks and lights, and really starts giving it just a tiny little pop. And as you can see, very small adjustment, just went +5. That's all it needs. I'm going to check my shadows here because I want to create some more depth. Because the light was so even, it can tend to look a little flat. So I want to be sure that I'm giving the image an opportunity to provide a little depth, even if it wasn't there. So it's just a matter of sliding it back and forth while keeping my eye on the screen and looking in areas such as this over here, that's behind these trunks that are right in front of us, maybe back in this vicinity here, back in here. I'm really wanting to create some depth between everything that we have in front of us and what's in the rear. So and you can see that even the shadows on the trees are being enhanced too, which I want, and will probably work on even more in layers once we hop into Photoshop. But right now, I just want to keep it from looking so flat, okay? I'm going to slide my exposure up just a hair because I know we're going to be toning that down once we get into Photoshop. But if you look at the histogram, watch what happens. It's just like in your camera. So if this is how we shot it, we have the histogram slammed up against the right-hand side as we shot it. This is the look we're going to get. But the benefit of paying attention to this histogram and exposing to the right is you can make the exposure anything that you want in post-processing, but you're dealing with all that tonal information that you grabbed by exposing to the right. Again, if that's something you're not familiar with, that's definitely something we can get you comfortable with, I promise you. So I'm going to bump it up just a little bit, simply because I know that once we get into Photoshop, I'm going to be bringing some of this stuff down. And again, small adjustment. You're going to see that most of these adjustments that I make are in very, very small increments. I don't ever want to make any adjustment that's large. If I have to have 10 layers in Photoshop for what some would adjust in one layer, I'd rather have the 10 in tiny increments than have the one large increment. Having 10 layers versus one. It's when you get in there and you start making these large adjustments, damage can show up, and it can show up quick. And then before you know it, you get so far into your image, and then you realize, oh, well, crap, I pushed it too far here. Now I've got to go back 10 layers. I've got to delete the last 10 layers I did to get back to where that big adjustment was. The only way you can get rid of it is to go back, delete those 10 layers you just worked up, spent time on, and then you got to start over again. So if you work in small increments, it's much less damaging, and you can, it's just a gradual build. So I think, in my opinion anyway, the smaller the increments, the less that you're going to have to deal with any nonsense. And I think it's just a better flow too. Again, you might end up with a ton of layers within your workflow, but whatever, that's what all that's there for. You build as many layers as you need to. If you look up here at the white balance, you can see it's set as shot, which means it's, as the white balance was set in camera. You can pull it down and you can adjust your white balance to whatever you want it to be, just as if you were making the adjustment in camera. You can see that these, if they don't match what's in your camera, the camera that you use, this is going to be very close. These categories here are going to be very closely related to what is in your camera. So as shot always comes up by default, but you can change it to anything that you want. Temperature, once this is set, it doesn't matter what category you're choosing, you still have the opportunity to change the temperature here and the tint. It's at 4850 right now, and that's the temperature that was collected onto the sensor when it was shot. I had it on auto white balance, and I typically always leave it on auto white balance because I know that in post I have this option here to change it to whatever I want. The more neutral that you can grab your shot with every adjustment, the better off you are. Well, not the better off you are, but the more control you'll have in post processing to make it whatever it is that you want. So if I shot it on cloudy, I'm immediately starting with a warm image. So I'm going to have to really kind of find, a happy place to get me to that neutral spot or more of a natural look. Whereas if, as shot, keeping my white balance in auto, I automatically have a very neutral place to start from. So I'm at 4850 is what it's registered as shot. I'm just going to pull it a little bit just to see if I like it in either direction, a little cooler or a little warmer. And actually, I think I like it just exactly where it was. So we'll put it back, 4850. Okay. The tint, I'm not going to mess with, at least here on this layer. This whole camera raw is something that I can bring up 2, 3, 4, 5 times within my workflow. But to just initially get the image started, this is kind of where you have to start, especially in Photoshop. I want to, as you can see, I've made very, very little adjustments because there just doesn't need to be a whole lot done on this one. You've got, up here you can go into your HSL adjustments, which is your hue, saturation, luminance. And with all the colors inside your image, you can make any adjustments to any color specifically. So let's say these pinks here. I'm going to grab the red slider and watch what it does. See how it affects only the reds that are in the image. And if you look in the bark here, so anything that has a red hue to it, it's going to grab and adjust. Can you see the adjustments outside of the blooms, even there on the bark? So anything that has red in it is going to adjust. Here, oranges, you're going to find the same in the road. There's a little bit of orange in the blooms, apparently, in the trunks, and even up in here where we've got just a tinge of it up in the leaves. But you get the idea. So that's the saturation. Here's luminance. So I'm going to grab the reds, dark, bright. Look at your flowers. See how it's only affecting the red areas? Very, very cool tool to use to make certain adjustments in your image, and it doesn't affect the entire image. And then here's hue, and you can see the gradation here for all these colors in which they go from, the greens here from yellow to green, the yellows from orange to green. So you can, again, I'm going to grab the reds, and I can make them any color that I want. So if I end up pushing this more towards yellow, within my reds, then I can go to yellows, and I can even do more with, or actually that's turning the, that's messing with the greens. Anyway, you get the idea. There we go. A little bit of change there. So these are your, again, your HSL adjustments, big time tool to use so you can pinpoint certain areas to make adjustments instead of them happening globally. Always, we've got the lens corrections tab here. It's this wide angle lens looking icon. Always click remove chromatic aberration. The best of lenses is going to, if it's going to show up, it's not going to show up on every image, but if it's going to show up, the best of lenses are going to give it to you too. And what chromatic aberration is kind of that haloing effect, and it's especially apparent when you've got a very dark area against a very light area, or vice versa, and you kind of get that haloing, that little bit of haloing on the edge of the contrast. By default here within Camera Raw, to remove chromatic aberration does a really, really good job. In most cases, it can get rid of it. A lot of times you can't see it unless you zoom way in. But on an image like this, where there's just so much going on here and there's not high contrast, say you've got a mountain ridge against a bright sky, something like that you might want to zoom in and really pay attention to, especially while turning this on and off, and you can see the difference that's being applied to your image. Enable profile corrections. What this does, see how it's recognized the lens that I used? If it feels it needs to correct the curvature that was captured from your lens, it will do so. You can see there's a little bit, see the little bit of adjustment that's being made. You're not going to see too much profile correction with the longer lenses, but on a wide lens, you can click this and it'll completely change. So it just kind of depends on what you want, the look that you want. If you want it to be pulled towards you a little bit or kind of stay out where it was, again, because this was a longer lens, there's not going to be a lot of difference between the two. But get up here, click this thing, and see the differences and choose which one that you want to implement. Those are basically the tabs that I'll use in RAW. So we'll go back to our main. This is our main panel. We got hue, saturation, luminance adjustments, and then each and every time going into my lens corrections tab and using the remove chromatic aberration. So once those adjustments are made, while I'm in here, I want to add, talking about the shadows and creating some depth, I want to add a little more depth in here, especially because there was some movement on this day. So my shutter was open. At least it wasn't open long, but it was long enough. You can see back here in the back that I've got some movement here. So that wind, there's actually a little more of an opening back here. So the wind was affecting this area a little more than it was up here. So I want to, not necessarily, I want emphasis on this area because this is where I want the eye to go. Anytime you have a road, you want the eye to follow down the road and end up down in this vicinity here. But because the eye is going there and because there is a little bit of blur, I want to throw some atmosphere in here. Some atmosphere is going to help me cover up a little bit of this, but it's also going to add some depth. It's just going to add some good moodiness, some good depth to the image. The way that I do that, up here, you've got your gradient tool here, gradient filter, graduated filter, I should say. And your radial filter. And what this is, well, let me show you the graduated filter real quick. It's just like a graduated neutral density that you would throw on the front of your lens. I click on the graduated filter. You see the crosshairs I've got here. Anywhere within the image here, I'm just going to go to the top. You're going to click, pull down, and you're going to see the area in which it's going to be applied. Now, as I hold the mouse, I haven't let go yet. The green line at the top is telling you green because that's where your adjustments are going to start. The red line is, hey, this is where your adjustments are going to stop. And it's going to be a gradient from here to here, meaning green line where it starts is going to be most potent, and then it's going to fade out to 0 to nothing here, just like a graduated neutral density on the front of your lens. So now that this area has been dropped down, this whole area is now a selection. So anything that I do, you can see, any adjustment that I make is going to be made only within this box from green to red. But as I mentioned, more potent at the top and then fading to 0 at the red line down below. So just to give you, it's not something we're going to use right now. We may use it here in a bit, but just to give you an idea of how that works. Same with the radial filter here. The radial filter is essentially a radius, a circle, that you can put on top of your image and either make adjustments outside or inside the circle, okay? So you don't have this option with the graduated that we just used, but with this radial we have that option, because you have space, you know, especially when you're working in such a tiny area. You're going to have opportunity to either put your adjustment inside or outside the circle. All right, with this, I'm going to move it down into this space here. I'm going to just grab it and make it the size that I want. And I don't want it overlapping these areas here that are closer to us, okay? I want it deep back into the drive here, because that's where I want the emphasis to be. That's where I want the atmosphere to be. That's where I want the depth to be created. So I'm just going to give it a shape that kind of fits into that space. Okay. I'm going to put it in place, simply drag it into place. And then within that circle, because I have inside clicked, my adjustments will be made. And here's just a quick grab. See what it's doing? Any adjustment, it doesn't matter what it is. Even if I come up here and grab the temperature slider, you can see every adjustment that I make is going to be inside the circle. Now, pay close attention to this feather slider here, because that's what's going to create the fall off. If we do 0 feather, you can see that any adjustment that I make, you have this solid outline, and it just doesn't, it just looks ridiculous. So to keep it natural and to keep a natural fall off feather, I always keep it at about 80%. So it doesn't give you any definitive line with your adjustment, and fades from here, the very center of where your adjustment is going to be made, to the outer edge very, very nicely and very natural. So what I want to do to create atmosphere back here and give it a little depth is I want to add what looks like moisture kind of in the air. You know, here in the low country, especially, you know, working into after our winter ends, we've got a lot of moisture in there. Of course, it increases as we get closer to the summer, but to have that moisture kind of floating in the atmosphere in the distance creates and provides a lot of depth within the image. Again, especially when we're dealing with such flat light, man, we've got to get in there and give it a little oomph, you know. So what I'm going to do within my gradient here is I'm going to grab this dehaze tool, and you guys are probably, if you do a lot of post-processing, you're going to be familiar with this dehaze tool. Basically, it either takes away or adds some haze, and you can even use it on as a global adjustment when something might look a little too hazy, that you know your entire shot might look a little too hazy. If you grab this thing and just give it a little pull, you can see that it eliminates a lot of that kind of blurred, light, airy kind of look. So if you're wanting something real sharp and you've got that hazy kind of look up in here, this dehaze tool is a really, really good tool to use. But I want to go in the opposite direction with this one. I just want to add I want to add a little bit of atmosphere back there, just to make it look like it was in the air. And, you know, usually when you're in the big middle of it, it's going to look much different than it does when it's in the distance. Especially your camera isn't going to pick it up as great as it will. It'll pick it up, but not as great as it will in the distance. So I'm going to go down here to this tab here, which is my on-off swap before and after. It's basically your on-off, just to show you what adjustments have been made compared to this is raw. This is before any adjustments were made, and this is after the adjustments have been made. So you can see everything that's been applied. Very little, but you can see the adjustments that have been made. I've just opened up the image a little bit. It's got a tiny bit of punch from when I used the clarity slider, and then that little bit of haze back there in the background has now not only added some atmosphere and some depth, but it's actually covered up a little bit of the blur from the movement. So I'm going to go, I'm happy with that. Like I said, I'll probably come back to this, maybe, we'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and click down here, bottom right. I'm going to go ahead and click Open Image. So this is going to take me straight into Photoshop, where I can now start working with layers and getting into some details and using some of the tools that Photoshop gives us the opportunity to use. First and foremost, we have our background image right up here. This is the file that we just created. I immediately want to right-click and duplicate layer. You can name it anything you want. You can leave it named background copy. Whatever you want to do with this name here is completely up to you. But each and every time you want to create a background copy. The reason being is so every adjustment that you make on top of this original background copy that you made, every one of these adjustments, every one of these layers that you are creating can be deleted, and you still will retain your original file. In fact, if you keep a lock on it, if you double click that, the lock goes away. Actually, I think you just click it once. Yeah, if you just click it once, it's now unlocked. So it's vulnerable to be changed. I suggest leaving it locked and just leaving it alone. Leave it there. Your original file, you're safe, you're good to go. You never have to worry about it. So here's our duplicate. It's our first layer. There doesn't need to be a whole lot done to this. But one thing that I do want to emphasize is the fact that we're working with such even light in this image, and I really want to take it to where it has some pop. And I think one of the ways that we can do that, first and foremost, is to start working on some shadows and highlights. So on top of this layer that I've just created by duplicating the original layer, I want to create a 50% layer. What a 50% layer is a mask that's going to be on top of this image that's working at a 50% opacity. And within that 50% opacity, we'll be working with an even lower opacity with our paintbrush. And I'll show you how. If you look down here, bottom right, you see this tabbed looking icon here. If we hold down Alt or Option, depending if you're with a Mac or a PC, we're going to hold down Alt, Option, we're going to click this icon, and this new layer box comes up. Again, you have the option to name it whatever you want. When I'm working with layers, I have a tendency to just blow them off and let the default name come up. But if it's something that I'm going to be using as a tutorial, simply because if I walk away from the image for a while, I'm going to forget what adjustments I made, then I'll name this layer. Or if it's just something you want to keep for yourself as a learning tool so you can reference later, name these tools like exactly what you did. For instance, this would be highlights, if I could spell, highlights and shadows. Okay. So now that, well, I shouldn't have done that. Let me go back, try it one more time. Highlights and shadows. And then what I'm going to do, the other adjustments I'm going to make here is mode. I'm going to choose soft light. And what this is just giving every adjustment, the overlay. The overlay for every adjustment that I make on this layer, it's going to apply it in a soft, gentle way, okay? You have several options here, and you can play with them to kind of see what effects you get. Overlay is a good one to use because it's basically it's going to make the same adjustments that we're going to make. It's just not going to have as soft as a look as what soft light will. Hard light, a little harsh, a little more harsh than soft, and so on. Again, so many here to play with. I definitely suggest getting in there and trying a few just so you can see what the differences are. And then this box here, fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray. We're going to click that. What that means is it's going to add, within every adjustment that you do, it's going to give you it's going to add 50% of a gray tonal matter to your adjustments. And what that's going to do is just tone, again, when we're working with small increments. So even within these small increments, we're making our adjustments even smaller. And the way that that's happening here is that 50% gray is just offering a softer, even though we're working with soft light, it's going even softer because that gray is being introduced. So say I pick bright orange. Well, it's not just going to go on bright orange because 50% of that color that I'm choosing is going to have gray introduced to it. And it just takes the initial blow down dramatically. And it just makes for a more subtle and more natural application. So with all these options chosen, the layer named, I'm going to click OK. And if you look over here, you can see that we now have a 50% gray mask. Okay, usually when you see a mask, it's either white or black. But because we went with 50% gray, every adjustment we make is going to be dealing at 50%. Okay, so on this layer, we're going to keep our paintbrush, which is this little icon right here. And we're going to go down to our color picker. And you can see the eyedropper tool that's floating around here. With that eyedropper tool, we're going to I'm going to go ahead and start working on the highlights. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to find a bright area that already exists on the tree naturally. This isn't something I'm trying to create from nothing. I want to use what's naturally there. So I'm going to find one of these bright spots on these trees. I'm going to go right here. Nope, it found the dark space there. Okay. See how it's actually a purple tinge? I'll probably end up pulling that purple down here in a bit. But right now, all we're looking for is a very natural color that currently exists in the image in this highlighted area. Okay, so let me click around here and see if I can find, there we go. So with this adjustment, I'm going to brighten it just a tinge, just a tiny, tiny bit. Click OK. I am going to go up to my opacity. You can see this is an opacity that was set before because I was making the same kind of adjustment on another image. It's set at 16%. I don't want to go crazy. Let's see. If I go 58%, I'm going to use my bracket key to enlarge the size of my brush. And this is just to give you an idea. Can you see, even at 58%, which is pretty stout, can you see how fuzzy and soft and light that is being applied? That's because we're working on that 50% layer. If we were just taking this color at 58%, well, in fact, let me do it real quick and I'll show you. So I just flattened it. So paintbrush, 58%. I'm going to paint. See the difference? Huge difference. So that 50% layer is giving us this opportunity for just subtlety. which is huge when you're working within an image, because you just want it to, you want these adjustments to be subtle. You want it to be natural. You don't want it to go crazy and look like it could never occur. So I'm going to back out, drop back down. Let's put ourselves around 20%. And I'm simply going to adjust my brush size with my bracket keys. And I'm just going to brush over lightly where highlights already occur within the image. Okay, I'm not adding anything that wasn't already there. I'm just giving it a little emphasis and trying to give that flatter light that was here on this morning a little bit more of a directional feel. So you can see that even with the soft ambient light that was present this morning, you can still see that the light source is to the right side, because the right side of all these trunks is what's being lit. So if we can create that direction or put emphasis on that direction, we can kind of pull away from the light being so flat against everything. And this can be very, very time consuming. I mean, you can get in here and you can spend hours, literally a couple, 3 hours on an image simply working on highlights and shadows. But for the sake of time and for the sake of y'all's sanity, so you don't have to sit and watch and listen to me for any longer than you have to, we're gonna go with that. So just a quick off and on. Can you see the difference? Okay. So with that same method, I'm going to swap here so we can hold on to that color we were using for our highlights. I'm going to again click our color picker tool, and I'm going to go straight to black because I'm going to work on shadows. Okay. I'm going to really keep an eye on my opacity up here, because black is going to be a little more profound than choosing or using a color. I'm going to increase my brush size, and I'm going to go over the shadowed areas that currently exist. Just doing the exact same thing, putting a little emphasis, creating that difference between light and shadow. Not going crazy with it. Subtle adjustments, small increments. And although it may be really difficult to see the adjustments being made now, when we go to click the layer off and on, you'll really be able to see the difference. Again, for the sake of your sanity, we're going to do this quickly, but give you a really good idea, enough to give you a really good idea of just how much these type of adjustments can help. All right, so on this 50% opacity layer, we now have highlights and shadows both. Here's the difference. Before, after. So before, you can look at this image and you can see where the light is. You can tell that it's on the right side of this, outside of the image, but on the right side, because the right side of everything is being highlighted. But with the adjustments that you made, the viewer can't deny in which way that light's coming. Very, very subtle, but very, very big time adjustment. Can you see the difference? So, super easy. Well, in fact, let's hop down in here. I'm going to keep the paintbrush. I'm going to keep some black paint on the paintbrush, the same opacity. In fact, I'm going to increase it just a bit. We were at 13. I'm going to go 20, roughly. How about 18? There we go. I'm going to get down in here, and where these shadows exist, I'm going to increase them. Oop, that's a little too much. So I'm going to go back up here to my opacity. Maybe get back down where we were. and just brush over these areas under here, and maybe even under here, just again to create a little more depth. Nothing crazy. Even up in here in the trees, where you've got some differences between the canopies. Up in here where there might be pockets. Again, that flat light isn't going to really give you a whole lot of opportunity to have shadowed areas because the light is so even. So to get in here and create some of that can really start giving some dimension to your image. And I'm going in here and I'm not, there might be a few spots that I add just a little in there, but I'm really trying to put emphasis on areas that already have some of that darker shadowy look to it. Because I don't want to, if I can help it, I don't want to introduce too much of what's not there naturally. I want to keep this thing looking as natural as possible. I just want to emphasize the natural elements that are there. So, even in here in the shrub, under the blooms, tiniest of adjustments. Okay. So again, off and on. Can you see the difference? Now we're starting to get a little bit of direction with our light. A little more direction than what was there previously. But if you've got this shrub down here, you've got this azalea shrub, and it's got this overhang, and the light source is up in this general area here, well, there's going to be some shadow under here, And there was to begin with, but again, because there's so much ambient light in this, you really didn't have the feel of having that shadow underneath. So it's up to us to provide some of that and give the viewer a little more of an opportunity to feel some of what was actually there when you took the shot. I might even put a little along the road here just to create a little bit of emphasis between the road and the grass itself. Now, you can, if you look at the mask over here, you can see that there's now different shades of where my adjustments were. I'm working right now at a 10% opacity. But if I make, I'm going to just show you here. If I make one adjustment, that's 10%. I let go of the mouse. I do it again, that's another 10%. I do it again, another 10. And it just keeps building until you reach 100. It's going to be hard to see here. But you're eventually going to reach 100% opacity. So if you're working at a 10% opacity with your brush and you go over this 10 different times, you're going to reach 100% opacity. If you look over here in the mask, see this spot I just made? That dark spot? It's now at 100%. So when it reaches to a 100% adjustment, it's going to be solid black. So you can see all these different shades. That tells you, in some places I was just simply working at the 13 that I was before, the 10. But if I hit it a couple times, it's going to get a little darker. We'll get rid of that adjustment. So that's looking pretty good. Before, after. Before, after. Now I'm going to collect all of these layers, compress it into one layer, keeping everything I've just done underneath. And the way that I'm going to do that is Command, Alt, or Option, depending on PC or Mac, Shift, and the letter E key. All four of those at the same time will collect everything that's already been done and create one layer on top for you to continue your processing. So the next thing I want to do, as I mentioned, there seemed to be a little bit of purple, and you can see it here within the color picker, you can see that it brought up a very purple color, and that was from physically clicking on one of these trees. Well, as we know, there's not purple in trees. So with this new layer that I've created, what I want to do is remove some of that purple. So I'm going to go up here to filter, and like I mentioned, we're probably going to go back into the camera raw filter. Here we are, right out of the gate. We're going to go in there. So I'm going to click on camera raw filter. It's going to pull up just as if we had pulled the image up originally. And I'm going to go to my hue, saturation, luminance adjustments. I'm going to go to the purples under saturation tab. I'm going to crank it up just so you can see where the purple is, where I can see where the purple is, and make sure that's the slider that I want to be using. As you can see, anything that's purple within the image, because I cranked it up to 100%, is going to be affected. You can see that it's nothing but the trunks. You can see they absolutely have some purple in them. If I bring it down, purple goes away. Now, naturally, there must be a tinge of it in there. That's the reason that